you need the fluidity, the adaptation that AI brings. You would be much more worried about verifying that things went right when you didn't have a human in the loop. The development of AI creates, if anything, a bigger pull for the ability to have verification on-chain of what happened and why it happened.
In 50 years, how does the average person gather information? I'm very pleased to be welcoming in person now this time Muriel Medard. She is the professor of software science and engineering at MIT and also the co-founder of Optimum. We had her on the show last year. Link down below to check out the last interview, and we'll be getting an update on Optimum as well as the future of blockchain technology. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
It's great to see you again, David. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It's great to see you at Consensus Miami, one of the premier crypto conferences in the world. It seems like a big theme of this year's conference is the pivot to AI, though. A lot of people are talking about how blockchain and AI could be integrated. And it seems to me, and some other investors as well, that a lot of capital has flown out of the blockchain ecosystem into AI and tech-related stocks and companies. So it feels to me, Muriel, that the blockchain and crypto spaces need a technological breakthrough to attract investor capital, or at least interest into the space to compete with AI, if that makes any sense. When would that technological breakthrough be?
That's a great point. I think maybe not so much to compete, in my view, but to complement and serve and help AI. And I think that the technological breakthrough, as you mentioned, is the fact that blockchain has been amazing in so many ways. Decentralization, the power that it has brought to so many. But it's a little sluggish. It's a little slow. It's not always very reliable in terms of when you're going to get what done. And that doesn't jive quite well if you're trying to run algorithms like artificial intelligence algorithms. I think blockchain can be amazing for AI. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is being able to know and verify the source of the data that you're training on. Make sure that you are training your models on legitimate data, not some junk. Being able to verify, particularly in agentic systems, that certain rules were followed. If you're going to let agents do something for you, whether it be financial transactions or any sort of action, how do you verify in a decentralized way that actually they're doing what they should be doing? So I think that blockchain can serve AI in such a radically useful way. But to do that, you do need to be able to scale, and you do need to make blockchain faster. Nobody wants to wait for several seconds when they're using any sort of AI service. So that, I think, is the bottleneck currently.
Before we go back into blockchain and your company, I was reading posts about a paper. I read part of a paper by two Wharton professors on the effects of AI on the economy. And the abstract summarizes as follows. The impact would be permanent. There would be a permanent loss of jobs and a permanent structural shift in the economy due to the foundational changes in employment that AI would create. Can you comment on that?
So I have not read the piece, and I cannot talk to the piece itself, but certainly I can talk to that thesis, which is, of course, I think a thesis that's currently widely held and, of course, widely worrying. I think this connects back to what we were talking about, the power, therefore, of blockchain, because what blockchain does is it brings, in a decentralized, highly democratized, highly accessible way, certain services on-chain. So if people can now use AI in this democratized, decentralized way to offer their services, to maybe be able to profit individually from the data, from whatever the services they can offer, that actually might, to some extent, counteract the issues that people are noticing currently. I do agree that the shift will be permanent. I don't think there's any way of going back, and I'm not sure that anybody wishes to go back, although, of course, it's natural to have mixed emotions. However, again, bringing this in a decentralized setting can allow people to benefit and contribute in ways that are not currently possible. So I actually see blockchain to a large extent as being a possible transformer with respect to AI in terms of how it's used and what its benefit can be.
Would AI have the potential to make ledger technology obsolete, which is to say AI agents could create its own more efficient way of tracking information and data distribution?
That's a really good point. The benefit of a ledger and in general of proofs lies in the fact that they are at their core incontrovertible. And, I've taught networking, what we call machine learning, usually in the class AI, discrete math for computer science at MIT. So I've never seen these things as being in any way opposite to each other, but I do see them as being very different. To me, many of the concerns around AI right now are actually that the verification step can be missing, right? You get an answer, looks pretty good, you're not quite sure how it got there, you're not quite sure, what data was used and so on. Whereas the ledger is by design something that has certain proofs and properties that makes it, if you will, inalterable and reliable. So I think that they're actually very complementary. You need the fluidity, the adaptation that AI brings, but you also need something that's, known to be incontrovertible, known to be correct, on which you can build that. And I think if you have one without the other, you either have something that's, a little bit like what we have currently, something that's fairly slow and sluggish, correct, but slow and sluggish, or you have something which is maybe fast, fluid, changing, very useful, but a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that these two can be, if anything, extremely, extremely symbiotic.
Before we continue with the video, I'd like to address one of the fundamental problems of owning gold. Now, gold is seen in most cases as a store of value, but it has one major problem. It doesn't generate a yield in itself. And that's where today's sponsor, Monetary Metals, comes in. Monetary Metals introduces a model where gold can produce a yield paid in physical gold. Through their leasing platform, investors can earn up to around 4% annually, with yield paid monthly in ounces. That means your returns are measured in gold itself, not just in fiat currency terms. In an environment where many assets depend on price appreciation alone, this approach allows gold to serve both as a store of value and as a source of income. The metal remains your asset and can be redeemed at any time. Thousands of investors are already earning a yield on their gold through Monetary Metals, so visit their website today to get started and learn more. That's monetary-metals.com/Lin. Link in the description down below, or scan the QR code here and get your gold to start working for you now.
A hot topic right now in the computer science world is the advancement of quantum computers at a pace that no one prior to, I guess, this year thought was possible. Now they're pushing up the timeline of quantum computers breaking encryption up from 2029 to sooner. That Google just published a paper on this. What does the blockchain industry do about it?
That's a really good question. And if you'll allow me, I may just take a minute or two to explain a little bit my perspective on the quantum advances and challenges.
Please.
As we've discussed before, I am actually by training an information theorist.
Yes.
I actually just recently won the Hamming Medal for my work on coding. Thank you very much. The reason I'm bringing it up is because Coding is both at the core of some of the challenges that lie in quantum computing, and it's also part of the remedies for solving the what we call post-quantum, sometimes just called PQ world in terms of security. So one of the reasons quantum computing has been so challenging is not just the physics, although of course they're extremely challenging, but it's also the fact that when you have a quantum computer, the state basically degrades. It's just inherent to the physics. You have this degradation of the state, and you need to correct it. So quantum computing has actually been a hotbed right now of activity in something called error correction coding, where coding is the creation of equations to represent data in a way that may be more robust. So interestingly enough, coding is at the core of the quantum computing race right now. So now let's go to what should crypto do? Well, what is crypto, right? In the name, there's cryptography, in the very name of crypto. In the 70s, there was sort of a fork between two different kinds of security that could have been taken. One is the crypto that we know, which relied on a set of problems called NP-complete, which were believed to be very, very hard, and that therefore those difficulties in solving those problems sort of lie at the core of what we know, right, as crypto. But there was a second fork, which has sort of lay halfway dormant, but is now re-emerging, which is actually what's called an information theoretic or coding fork. And that actually uses coding not to create problems that are computationally difficult, but actually to create a protection which does not rely on just computational difficulty, but relies on something much harder, much deeper. And, the granddaddy of them all is something called the McLeese crypto system, named after my pal, the unfortunately now deceased, the late great Bob McLeese from Caltech.
One of the benefits of stablecoins is the speed at which we can transact peer-to-peer. Will there come a point at which decentralized AI will make it so efficient for us to transact and send money that we no longer need distributed technology on blockchains for that purpose?
Yes, I think that decentralized AI can really help in deciding why you would transact.
Okay.
But having the provable trace and also the provable correctness of those transactions will remain. If anything, I think it will become more important. You would be much more worried about verifying that things went right when you didn't have a human in the loop. And in particular, when you may have had certain transactions that happened without a clear explanation just because the algorithm decided that it was a good idea. So my view is that the development of AI creates, if anything, a bigger pull for the ability to have verification on-chain of what happened and why it happened.
You mentioned coding being the core of the issue. I wonder what the computer science curriculum at MIT, where you currently teach, will look like in 5-10 years' time. Prominent tech leaders in Silicon Valley have already made comments like coding will no longer be necessary.
Yes, yeah. So I think that certainly coding in terms of programming is going to see a very heavy change in terms of how it's taught, how it's used. And I think it's very much in flux currently.
Well, before you continue, so to somebody who doesn't know how to code and wants to learn how to code, now you have AI agents that are capable of creating code for you and debugging codes for you.
Yeah.
Probably more efficiently than a human can.
Absolutely.
Would you still encourage them to learn the fundamentals of languages?
I think that time will tell.
Okay.
I would encourage them to learn the fundamentals of algorithms.
Okay.
Because the algorithms and the algorithmic thinking is crucial. Languages come and go. Certainly, the languages that I learned as, a young engineer are generally different
Yes.
than the ones that are being used now. But the structures, the algorithms, and that rigor of thinking never goes away. Again, if anything, I think that it becomes more important in an age of AI because you need to have better judgment.
Yeah.
You now need to be able to assess with a lot more critical thinking the quality and the correctness of something that was done.
Okay. Tell us about Optimum and the problem you're trying to solve.
Yes. So Optimum is a data acceleration, universal data acceleration. We had talked about the challenges with speed and bandwidth before in our conversation for blockchain. And what that includes is basically not just propagation, but also acquisition of different data streams, such as, for instance, incoming orders, right? So you want to make an order, somebody has to, gather these transactions, package them, and put them in blockchain. How do you speed all of that up? And then, writ large, how do you manage to get the data that you need, the access to the data when you need it, where you need it, and being able to update the data in a verifiable way when you're working over a decentralized system.
You mentioned earlier that we still need proof of work to verify transactions. It's a good
I think proof of something.
proof of something.
Yeah, proof of something. Yeah.
So do you think blockchain technology could be the basis or the foundation for providing this verification and trust between AI agents in the future
Absolutely.
transacting with each other?
Absolutely.
How would that work?
I think there are very many ways in which it can
Yeah.
work. But, the proofs are basically inherently agnostic, right, to what you're trying to prove. And I completely agree with you. If your agent is going to talk to my agent, we need to then have a way of proving what happened to see in an impartial, verifiable way that, was it my agent that did something wrong?
Yeah.
Was it your agent that did something wrong?
Sure.
What happened? How are we going to resolve this? So having a structure which allows basically a shared trust model, regardless of, what you told your agent that you wanted to happen, what I told my agent that I wanted to happen. That's essential, actually, for this sort of agentic information gathering to occur.
How does your work in data correction lay the foundation for agentic AI?
So what we've looked into is several aspects. Actually, it's a very rich field, I should say, and also a very active field. One of them is around basically being able to access the data in a decentralized way to enable AI systems to work more effectively, because AI systems don't work in a vacuum. They need information. If anything, they're extremely avid consumers of information. So now having access to the information swiftly, verifiably, and at all times is very important. So that's one of them. You can also do what's called federated learning, where the data is not necessarily available in a single spot, not just a giant data center with, that's just vacuuming in all of this data and then crunching through it in a monolithic way, but something that's much more fluid, much more able to go and get data that you may need in different locations. And sometimes that data actually is there to verify whether something happened or not. So there's a lot of systems, for instance, called RAG systems in machine learning, where you basically go and say, hey, I got this far. To do a good job, I would actually need to know this other thing. Where do you go and get that other thing? How do you verify that the extra data that you went and obtained is indeed correct?
So to close out, let's talk about the future.
Yeah.
50 years ago, to obtain information, I had to go to the library or turn on the news or listen to the radio. Fast forward to today, there's many ways I can gather information. What does the next 50 years look like? What in 50 years, how does the average person gather information?
That's a great question. I think that if you go through the arc of what you just described, right, you start with something where the information is a push, right? That you don't have a say. You maybe say which book you pick, but somebody else picked the books for you. You know, the TV channel just put whatever you want, whatever it wanted on it. You know, it had some idea what you wanted, but that there was no interaction. Now you go to the point where, as you just mentioned, I have the choice of what I get, right? So now there's a pull of the information. And now going back, looping to the beginning of our conversation around AI, I may not just want information, I may want action. So what I'm doing is now I'm involved, but I'm not just involved in pulling information, I'm involved in actually creating an action that I want. What do I want to have happen with that information? You know, it's not just about getting that information and then gathering and then figuring out what I want to do with it, but actually immediately using that information not for my benefit, but for the benefit of some intention that I have. So I think that this arc that I mentioned goes towards more and more intentionality and inclusion of the person's intention into the use of information.
Is AI making us smarter or dumber? So I'll give you two cases. One could argue the speed at which we perform tasks efficiently and the speed at which we gather more information now. We can collect more information every single day. More information arguably makes us smarter. However, I read another study that's concluded that they got two control groups, one using ChatGPT to do creative writing and one without. And the group that used ChatGPT initially had a leg up, an edge, because it came up with more ideas for them. And after a certain amount of time, they took ChatGPT away. That control group then regressed back to their baseline level of writing and never improved, whereas the other group that kind of got better over the weeks stayed better.
That's a very interesting study. I'm not surprised. I think this goes back to what I was mentioning about studying algorithms and actually studying mathematics in general. If anything, I think it has become more important because you need that critical thinking. And you need to actually now operate that critical thinking in a much more sophisticated way. You need it less for very simple things. I mean, you know, the example that people often give is the calculator, right? I don't calculate as well now as when I was a kid and I was having to do a lot of, manual calculation because I was taught to do it. I mean, you know, I'm very good at approximating in my head, but certainly, you know, I was, much faster at long division. So what? There are other higher level thinking skills, but you need to build up to those higher level thinking skills. So I think that if anything, having a much more precise, thoughtful, rigorous approach becomes much more important in the age of AI, because, you'll have to be there and you'll have to, choose among these ideas or go, that's no good, come up with your own. That sort of much more powerful, in my way of thinking, interaction is actually going to require these higher level thinking skills.
Final question. To somebody who's maybe 17 or 18, just about to enter college or finish high school or go into trade school, whatever it is that they decide to do, what would you encourage that young person to do such that they future-proof their career in the age of AI, such that their human labor still has value in 50 years?
I would encourage them to do, and by the way, I have kids of around that age, so it's definitely something that I give thought to, not just as a technologist but also as a parent. I really encourage them to learn skills that, again, set them apart from the point of view of judgment. And I think that aspect of judgment is so important, learn some math.
Sorry, what do you mean by judgment? Whose
Judgment, yeah, that's a good question. Critical thinking.
Okay.
Seeing things and saying, okay, this is a really good answer. This looks like a good answer. Let me think about it critically. I know some math. I know some history. My mother was a history professor. I know, does this make sense? Okay, maybe it does a little bit. Let me try to delve more into it. So I think that having that critical thinking and being able to really discern in a much deeper way what's going on is very
How
important.
do we train critical thinking at a young age? I harken back to my elementary school and early high school days when a lot of the tests and exams were based on memorizing a bunch of facts. And I and my classmates would cram the night before and memorize whatever it is we needed to memorize and get an A, and that would be the end of the semester.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Not the best way, but to be fair, not the worst way either. I think that in general, having people have to engage with problems and think about them is the best way to give that critical thinking. These problems can be mathematical problems. It can even be, we were talking about writing. Writing is problem solving. How do I convey this? Does it look good when I'm done? What's missing? Where are the gaps? So I think that doing that sort of critical thinking is going to be very polymorphic. There are many facets to it and many different ways to get to it. But I think that that's going to be essential.
Muriel, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate speaking with you in
David,
person.
it's a pleasure. A pleasure.
Good luck with all your success at Optimum, and we
Thank you.
look forward to more future success. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe.